Welcome to the Fantasy Baseball Beat. Thank you for joining us. My name is Chris Torres. I am your host. Folks, we've got a great episode today. We are going to be talking all things Red Sox with Chris Cotillo of Mass Live and host of the Fenway Rundown podcast. But before I introduce him, let me bring in my co-host, Mike Carter. He's getting ready for his trip to First Pitch, Arizona. I'm super jealous of him. But Mike, what is going on, man?
Well, I'm a little nervous about my flight tomorrow, Chris, because I have to fly on Spirit Airlines, which means if I have to sit in the middle seat, it's going to be a little cramped for the people around me. Stuffing everything I can into a backpack and ready for takeoff at 7 a.m. So ready to get down there and see everybody and have a great time this weekend. See some Arizona Fall League stuff. See the All-Star game on Sunday night. I'm sticking around for that. It's going to be a great time. Wish you were coming.
Yeah, one of these days I'm going to get out there, but for now I'm going to have to live vicariously through you, my friend. Man, good luck on Spirit. I haven't heard good things about that airline.
Yeah, they actually they charge you extra if you survive the flight. That's the hidden.
It seems to be the case. Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, that voice you heard, that is our guest. Again, we have Chris Cotillo. Last name rhymes with pillow. He's a writer at masslive.com. Also, again, the host of the Fenway Rundown podcast. You can find him on Twitter at Chris Cotillo. Chris, thank you so much for coming on. I'd like to start, though, by learning a little bit about you. So if we could start by you telling us, how long have you been on the Red Sox beat and what led you down this career path?
I always say I'm the most jaded, grizzled 27-year-old ever, because I have done this for a long time now, and just because I started so young, when I was 16, 17, 18, I started out at SB Nation. I was a national reporter there. At first, that was what I thought of myself, and nobody else thought that way, because I had no followers and no readers and anything like that, but was trying to break stories, national baseball stuff, and over time, was able to actually build an audience, especially on Twitter, and was with SB Nation for 5 years, and then started at Mass Live right when I graduated college in May of 2018. So that was this past year was my 5th year on the Red Sox, which has been crazy because, first year came in the middle. They won the World Series. 2019 was like kind of normal until they fired Dombrowski, and then the Cora scandal happened, and then they traded Mookie, and then a global pandemic, and then Chaim Bloom is hired, and then all these Chris Sale injuries, an ALCS trip, and a last place finish later, we're, I guess, 5 years in. So it's been a really crazy time to cover them. But yeah, from here, grew up here, so covering the Red Sox, calling Fenway in office is a dream, obviously, on a day-to-day basis. So, and there's always a story. There's always something entertaining happening, and there's always a lot of interest, which is the best part of being around here.
Yeah.
So you've covered just a few things in your time with the Red Sox.
Exactly. No, it's like there's never a dull moment.
Yeah, that is awesome, man. So you started super young. You said around 16. How did you was this just like always your goal? Like from even before that, you were just like, I want to be a sports writer.
No, not really. I will always be kind of more convenient, easy to say it that way. I, just always had a love for baseball, and at some point you figure out you're not going to reach the majors. I think my probably 850, 40 time or whatever, and inability to hit or field or really do anything else. But the biggest thing I got out of my baseball career was sitting on the bench and learning how to score, which I do at the games in the press box now. So that was
that was not a waste of time.
Thing. Well,
big deal.
It was for sure waste of my parents' time. But it's been I guess everybody I always loved the business of baseball, really. That's what it came down to. I love the winter meetings. I love the trade deadline. I followed that stuff from afar and always thought when I was a kid, super nerdy, but like how cool would it be to be at the winter meetings, to be at, to be in a clubhouse at the trade deadline, and being able to do that the last decade or so has been really amazing.
And you're going to Vegas soon, right, for the winter meetings?
Yeah, GM meetings next week. Yeah, so GM meetings
okay.
in Vegas next week, which I said, corresponding with the beginning of the college basketball season is not really good for me, and I might not make it home.
All right. Well, listen, thank you again. Thank you for sharing a little bit of your story. Did want to ask, just your overall assessment of the 2022 season for the Red Sox. Obviously it did not go as well as many had planned. I want to ask you, in your opinion, where do you think things went wrong for this team?
I mean, a lot of it was injuries, like they were very, very injured for most of the year. When you have, Chris Sale, you have James Paxton, those guys combined for a total of 5 innings. I think they had higher expectations for that heading into the season. They expected those guys to be healthy, and then by the time the summer, rolled around, it ended up being, Garrett Whitlock and Nathan Eovaldi and Kike Hernandez and a bunch of those guys get hurt. Well, that, and Trevor Story getting hurt down the stretch, and Whitlock and Houck dealing with a lot of injuries, season-ending surgeries for those guys. Like, they just were never at full strength. I think the roster was incomplete at the beginning. Anybody who watched saw that they played way too much of Jackie Bradley Jr. in the outfield, Bobby Dahlbeck, Franchi Cordero, Travis Shaw. Nice guys, not Major League first baseman. And, they didn't really have stability at that position until Tristan Casas came up at the end of the year. So it was an incomplete roster. The bullpen was never right. And by the end of the... Hold on a second. I don't know what's going on here. I think some alarm's going off.
Mike, I'm just going to follow up on the Jackie Bradley thing, but then you take the next two, okay?
Sure, that sounds good.
Okay.
Sorry, we just moved in here. We got all sorts of bells and whistles going on, but
no problem.
Hopefully editable. But
yeah,
we'll start
we'll
wherever back we were.
Yep. Okay, so yeah, Chris. I mean, you're right. There were a ton of injuries, and it just did seem, even going into the season, like there were some pieces that just didn't fit. One move that really puzzled me was the Hunter Renfroe trade. I mean, it kind of, it's easy to play Monday morning quarterback because they really lacked power. They could have used that power. But like, do you have any insight into why that move was made, the Hunter Renfroe for Jackie Bradley trade?
Yeah, I think that the Red Sox, they've kind of tried to swing back and forth on certain things in certain years. This year, there was a huge priority on defense. Hunter Renfroe kind of wowed people with his arm and assists and all that stuff in 2021, but the defense was not great out in right field, especially in a right field of Fenway where you need a really strong defender. They definitely missed, Jackie Bradley's presence in the outfield defensively. It was not a good team in 2021. And that's, ultimately they came up 2 games short of the World Series. There was multiple reasons for this, but, I think that was a big thing heading into the offseason. And they liked the prospects they got in Alex Pinellas and David Hamilton in that trade. So they figured, kind of a creative deal, one that came out of nowhere. I think that trade works if you add, like, a real starting outfielder, whether that be, the guys that they were talking about at the time. Kyle Schwarber, bad defender, obviously. Seiya Suzuki was a guy they were interested in. Castellanos, again, a bad defender. But, like, somebody like that where, you have even a Tommy Pham, who would have been, a little bit of an upgrade over Jackie, who just did not hit throughout the season. But to have him out there, like, as a part of your starting 9 every day offensively, he's just not capable of that anymore. And so that really hurt them, and they didn't get production from a lot of spots throughout the year. First base was a black hole again until Tristan Casas came up. Christian Vasquez and Plawecki for the first month or so of the season, getting nothing out of them. Center field also, Kike Hernandez had a bad year. He was hurt. Jarren Duran gave them virtually nothing offensively. So there was just a lot of spots that I think that they didn't shore up as much as they should have, and then when they got hurt and more hurt, it just turned into a house of cards that fell down pretty quickly.
Yeah, shifting gears a little bit, Chris. the Red Sox have some interesting contract decisions and situations to make this offseason too.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think is going to happen with Rafael Devers? Do you think they get a deal done? And what do you think about Xander Bogaerts coming back? I know a lot of Cubs fans here in Chicago are hoping that he's going to remain free and spring the coop in Boston. What are you thinking about those two guys?
I think that they're the Red Sox number 1 and number 2 priorities right now heading into the winter. They have to be. I think there's a lot of pressure on Chaim Bloom to bring those guys back, not just because people want the team in the future to be good and they've, fallen in love with those homegrown stars. A lot of it's that they don't want to repeat of the Mookie situation. People are still upset here 3 years later that Mookie Betts is gone. I never thought it was necessarily a bad trade because I thought he never would have re-signed, long term. But with Devers and Bogaerts, you can't, if you're the Boston Red Sox and you're a team that has so much money, you can't let the 3 of those guys walk in a period of 3 or 4 years. Right now I think they're focused on, and they have a few big decisions to make in the next couple of weeks. Bogaerts is going to opt out. Sounds unlikely they get a deal done. I do think he's their priority at shortstop and that he wants to be here. So if I were to guess, I'd say more likely than not that he comes back, but once he hits free agency and he can start talking to teams literally for the first time in his whole career, right? In 15 years since he's, signed since he signed as an international free agent when he was a very unheralded kid in Aruba, he's going to get to talk to other teams. That for some guys, he goes out to San Francisco or goes to Wrigley and sees, oh, wow, this would be great, and they're offering me this much money.
Sure.
Once you get to that point, anything could happen. I'd still put the Red Sox as the favorite. With Devers, I think that he is a huge priority. There were some reports last week that they had restarted talks. A lot of people kind of told me behind the scenes to, calm down. There's not really much going on there. Nothing's close. But I do think that they are going to give him the proverbial bag at some point. I think they are going to, whether it be some point, later this year or in spring training. He's a year away from free agency, so they have some time for that. But lock him up, $300 million deal, whatever it is, get it done, and you're the Red Sox, pay the guy. At some point they just have to do that. Yeah. If I were to say, if I had to put it either way, I'd say more likely than not that either are back, but it wouldn't surprise me if either was gone. Obviously, a lot more time to figure out the Devers thing than with Bogaerts, who's going to be free here in 10 days.
It's interesting because a lot of outside people, I'm outside of Chicago, and I think when the Red Sox signed Trevor Story, a lot of people saw that as laying the groundwork for not bringing Bogaerts back. But I think it makes a lot of sense for him to stay there too.
Yeah, no, I think that they love that up the middle mix. Trevor Story's year was definitely, strange. I think that he got hurt a lot. A late start. He didn't sign until 2 weeks before opening day. He ended up having to go home because his wife had a kid like 3 days after he signed. There was a delay with the physical because he didn't want to get the vaccine at first. Like there was a lot of different things, some out of his control, some in his control. It ended up being like he got into like 4 or 5 spring training games before opening day, and then he didn't hit early in the season, came down with a stomach bug. The first month was lost for him completely. In May, once he was ready to go and finally kind of acclimated, I understand these guys are getting paid like a ton of money. He's getting $140 million, so there's no excuses. But the guy changed teams, leagues, cities, became a father for the first time, and changed positions in 2 weeks. Yep. Like, how would any of us react to that? So
not well on this end.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I can't even move apartments. But there's like that to me was he was never going to make excuses. I always said I'll be the one to make excuses for him. Once he was good, he settled into second, was excellent defensively there, became a run producer, drove in a lot of runs when he was healthy, hit some home runs when he was healthy, and then by the end of the year, there's some nagging things, which this is a guy who's been very durable in Colorado. So I think it was a bumpy first year that, I wrote right before he got hurt and missed the last month and a half that it actually was a successful year for him, which might have jinxed him. But, I think they're happy with what they saw from him, and they'd be totally fine. I think it's more likely that if not Bogaerts at short and Story at second, then Story stays at second and they, go sign Swanson or Correa or somebody to play short. I think that those things are more likely than Story going to short and figure out second base. I think they like the stability at second base that he brings.
That's interesting. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it sounded like it was really just a perfect storm, of these
sure.
kind of negative events for Trevor Story. And, we're looking at things from like a fantasy baseball angle, right? And we may see, well, that was a disappointing year from a fantasy perspective. But, I hear what you're saying, though, that, if you look at the totality of his year, he actually was kind of successful. He got acclimated to a new city And I think he is one of those players that we could look to for a bounce back next season.
Yeah, I would agree with that for sure.
For sure. Chris, another guy that was really interesting to a lot of us that were outside of Boston and didn't really know much about him was Brayan Bello. He had a really great season in the minors and has really been fairly dominant throughout his career in the minors, and it had some mixed results last year. What do you think about his prognosis for this year? Do you think he takes a step forward?
I think that he has the potential to become an ace. The first day he got called up, made his major league debut at Fenway. Rob Refsnyder was walking through the clubhouse and came up to me and another reporter and said, "Have you guys ever seen Bello throw in person? Have you ever seen him?" Like, no, we haven't. All right, it's like, I know you might like just pay attention today. Like, just really watch the show, enjoy the show. Like it's the stuff is tantalizing and all that. And when they called him up, and this kind of Red Sox fans jumped off the bandwagon on this guy kind of quickly, which was completely ridiculous because he's super young and super talented. When they called him up, it was before he was ready. They had at that point Waka was down, Evaldi was down, Whitlock was down. And they had already gone through Kutter Crawford, Josh Winkowski, Connor Siebold. Like, Rich Hill had just gotten hurt. Like, all those guys got hurt in a period of 2 weeks. They were literally down 4 of the starting 5. Nick Pivetta was the only one still going. So they had to go. It was the first time since the 50s or 40s or the 50s the Red Sox had to start 4 rookies in a row. And he was the 4th one up of that group. And he did not, have great outings his first 3 or 4 times out because he was not ready for the majors. He was called up out of necessity. They didn't have like some veteran on a minor league deal they could have called up. It's just like they were that far down the depth chart. They were on option like 9 or 10 at that point. Not to say that, next year he might be option number 1 or 2, but at that point in July he wasn't. Ended up getting hurt. Looked okay in a couple outings, and then in September was really, really good. The expected numbers were there throughout the year. The counting stats, the stuff that actually matters in terms of, performance perspective actually ended up being, good toward the end of September, and they were very, very pleased. I think he's a locked-in part of the rotation next year. I think he has the potential to be a front-end guy. He's probably the most exciting pitching prospect they've had around here in a long time. They haven't been able to develop starters. They want to keep him there. Everything about his makeup, confidence, all that sounds great from talking to people there. And obviously the pitch mix, the changeup, people have made comparisons to Pedro. So the sky is really the limit for him. All those guys that came up last year, Crawford, Winkowski, Siebold, we've seen other guys in the past, like there's limits on those guys, right? They might be a back-end starter. They might turn into a long reliever, whatever. But Brayan Bello could be an ace, and I think they're hoping that he takes that leap. And he's a guy that, like I said, he might be a little underrated now because of, if you look at the numbers, they're not, incredible because he was called up a little earlier than he should have been. But, he's a guy that is very, very impressive, and they expect to have a long time in the rotation.
Yeah, and his numbers in the minors were just filthy.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I hear you. People were a little disappointed.
He started
when
at
he
Double
came
A
up.
last year too. And he started the year at Double A and was in the majors like July 10th. That doesn't really happen. So.
Yep. Yeah, and fantasy gamers have kind of soured on him as well. You talked about Red Sox fans jumping off the bandwagon, and I see here in early drafts, Mike, Brayan Bello's going in like the 300s.
Yeah,
so he's not getting that rookie top prospect helium that you often see because, again, the results were a little bit mixed in his time in the majors. But definitely appreciate your insights, Chris. I mean, it seems like the players, and people around the organization really see him as a frontline guy moving forward.
Yep.
I'm going to give him the Cotillo bump this weekend in my draft.
There you go.
For sure. Could. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
Sound like a homer, but it's just,
no,
I'll tell you who's not good. We'll get to that.
Speaking of which, can you talk a little bit about my old White Sox friend Chris Sale?
Mm-hmm.
He obviously struggled with some pretty freakish injuries last year. Is he healthy? Is he somebody that you think that the Red Sox can count on next year?
Count on no. Is he healthy? Yes. The different answers to the same question. I think he is healthy, right? I actually was just talking about this on my own show. Like, okay, he snapped a rib throwing a pitch. Weird, however that happens, I don't know. But it healed. And then a comebacker snapped his pinky. Well, that heals. And then he broke his wrist in a biking accident. Well, that heals, right? These are not like, shoulder or, thoracic outlet. Like there's not these crazy things you see linger for a while. These are like bones heal and then you're fine. Do I think he's, after going through all this and a Tommy John surgery and shoulder stuff and stuff in 2018 and 2019, do I think he's as healthy and the ceiling's as high as it was early in his career in Chicago and here? No, but they, there's nothing that they're looking at lingering. The thing with him is what's next, right? Like what could possibly happen next? Heim Bloom used the, like I feel very bad for the guy. Like there's it's not like he's as hard a worker as you ever see. And as Heim Bloom said, like we have to go recover that Chris Sale voodoo doll because something is wrong and something's happening with this guy over and over.
He's got to take it easy. I mean, between the cutting up the jersey when he was in Chicago,
I wasn't going to bring that up
in spring training.
Right. No, there was some of that, but he never got hurt doing that stuff.
Right.
To our knowledge, I just think he's part of the mix. He has the ceiling, I think, still of being a very good major league starter, and the floor is 0 because that's what is this year he pitched 5 innings. Last year 40, the year before 0. So there he just opted into his 2 years, $55 million left in his deal. They want to be part of the rotation next year. They think at his best he could be front line of that rotation with Bello and Pivetta, whoever they sign in the next few weeks or months. So I'm not ready to count him out yet. I could see why people would because it's been brutal, literally, for like 4 or 5 years of injuries. But again, none of that stuff theoretically lingers. So come March, come April, he should be good to go unless something else happens, which it continues to. But as of now, he's healthy. Yeah.
Okay. So I want to go to another player that I think you were alluding to before. Was who was considered one of the foundational pieces of the Red Sox moving forward, someone they acquired in the Mookie Betts trade, which is Jeter Downs. And the last name is appropriate because, man, last year was just a disaster, worse than down. So tell me a little bit about him. Do you have any insight into his struggles, and do the Red Sox still see him as a key part of their future?
I don't think so. No,
Okay.
I don't. I mean, if you look at just who they have coming behind him in the system, Nick York, Marcelo Meyer, they get a bunch of these infielders that could play up the middle. They drafted a bunch of, like infielders again this year with, just he's just falling down the depth chart, right? And like you have Story there, and theoretically they're going to sign a shortstop, or if it's not Bogaerts. So to me, Jeter Downs is a guy that is potentially like change of scenery trade candidate, or maybe even a DFA candidate, if they need a roster spot. The strikeout rate was astronomical in the majors. The hit tool just never developed at AAA. It hasn't been for 2 years, and then he got hurt at the end of the year. So he's a guy that I don't think's in the future plans. He gets a longer leash, I think, just based on being part of that Mookie Betts trade. And but no, I don't see much of a future there.
Yeah, Mike, I'm pulling up some of these NFBC drafts, and I think fantasy players have soured on him as well. He was only drafted at the end of one of these drafts so far. So, yeah, he's fallen quite a bit in every respect. So I want to shift gears a little bit and talk to you more, Chris, about what the overall direction of this franchise is at this point. I'm wondering, what is Heim Bloom's vision? What is his strategy for building this team?
Yeah, well, so far it's been let's build to try to build a winner, and then let's build to try to have a long-term sustainable product. The farm system has gotten a lot better in the last 3 or 4 years. You've seen the kind of these top guys, whether it be Casas or Bello or Garrett Whitlock was a Rule 5 pick. Some of these guys, and then they've hit, on some depth pieces, whether it be John Schreiber as a waiver claim or Christian Arroyo as a waiver claim. Like some of those moves have worked out. And so overall, there is more depth in the organization. And even, guys like Winkowski and Crawford who showed some signs last year, or a guy like Zach Kelly who was really good down the stretch in relief, or Caleb Ort, minor league, there's a lot of marginal guys, that they actually have hit on a lot that haven't worked out because, with Heim Bloom, there's a constant roster churn, right? Like since the end of the season, they've claimed 3 guys I've never heard of off waivers, and they're on the 40-man roster. Who maybe they're the next Garrett Whitlock, maybe they're DFA'd tomorrow. Who's to say? I think now is where the pedal, the rubber meets the road, pedal to the metal time. He needs to produce a winner. I think the seat's starting to get hot heading into next year. I think it's fair to say that. Let's call 2020 a wash because they traded Mookie. the weird stop. They had a lot of moving parts, and then the weird stop and start 60-game season. They were horrible. Eduardo Rodriguez, ended up missing the whole season with a heart issue. Chris Sale ends up missing the whole season. Call that a wash. 2021 was great. 2022 was horrible. So I have Heim at one bad season and one horrible one. If you wanted to be, devil's advocate, you could say he's finished last twice. 2020, I'm just going to completely say was a sham. So I say 1-1. And if you're going to hire a guy to build long-term sustainability and build an organization, you got to give him a little bit of time, But this is not a city and it's not a fan base that preaches patience very often. So that's why I think that the clock is starting to tick. And it'll be interesting. I think there's just going to be this kind of classic angel and devil on his shoulder type thing throughout this season, or throughout this off season rather, that, okay, I need to stick to my principles. What made the Rays successful when I was there for 15 years? And what are my principles? Build from within, build up the farm, long term, find the bargain, go on the margins, don't overpay. And then the other side saying, like, go sign Aaron Judge for $400 million because fans will love you and your team will be, on ESPN all the time. Like, is he ever going to cave into that temptation? He hasn't really so far. But now the Red Sox are not as relevant as they've been previously in this town, for sure. They've been surpassed. The Bruins are amazing. The Celtics are a contender. The Patriots rule the whole thing. So does ownership get involved and push him? There's a lot of those questions. I think it's like, does he stick to his guns in long-term sustainability, or does he make those moves? Fans wanted to make those moves, and if he thinks he's in, not job-saving mode, but trying to at least extend his leash a little bit, maybe he goes out and makes a big move that he hasn't so far.
Yeah, it's interesting. It almost seems like with him, it's maybe I'm off base, but it's like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole, right? It's like he comes from Tampa where they had to skimp for every dollar, and now he's here with the Red Sox where maybe they're not spending like they did 10, 15 years ago, but now he's got all these resources at his disposal. So it's interesting. It's almost like a completely different job.
It is. And look, like I said, I think, they did give Trevor Story $140 million, right? Like that was a sizable deal. Right. And the payroll was kind of, it was very high, and they were over the luxury tax this year. So like the thing that the whole idea they don't spend is not great. The fact that they had, $16 million last year went to David Price. $30 million went to Chris Sale. You got exactly 5 innings out of those two guys, obviously, because Price is in LA. You had a lot of money going to JD Martinez, $20 million, who was bad. Nathan Eovaldi, $17 million for, 18 starts, whatever, 16 starts, whatever it was. So like, it just, those deals, once they come to the end, and like once this core came to the end, like they weren't good deals anymore. And so they have literally $120 million to spend and add to the payroll before going over the luxury tax. I think he's going to do that. I think he's going to exceed it. I think he's going to make big moves. It's just, you get a hit. Now he's going to hit on.
For sure. Chris, a guy that I really like there, who might be a better baseball player than he is a fantasy player, is Alex Verdugo. Where do you see him fitting into this thing long term? I mean, I don't. I guess the follow-up question that I would have to that is, for fantasy players, do you think there's another level to him in terms of the power and the speed combination?
Yeah, but I think those two things work against each other. I think there is another level for him. I don't know if it's going to be in Boston. It seems like a foundational piece. He also, just like Jeter Downs, has a little bit of a longer leash because he was acquired in that Mookie trade, and he was really good in 2020 for them in that shortened season. But the last, if you look at numbers across the board this year, they were down pretty much in everything except doubles. Like I'm talking every advanced metric, every offensive stat, defense, speed. And, there's a lot of people with the Red Sox who are not really pleased about how he carried himself throughout the year. And that was, he bulked up to try to hit for power, got away from what he does best, which is be a slap hitter, get on base, be able to play fine defense. Sprint speed goes down, his arm regressed. This is something that happened, the exact same thing with Andrew Benintendi 2 or 3 years ago, and the Red Sox were really angry about that to the point where they traded him, and I wouldn't be shocked if the same thing happened. 2 years ago, they traded Benintendi, 2 years away from free agency. Last year, they traded Renfroe, an outfielder, 2 years away from free agency. This year, Verdugo's 2 years away from free agency. That's either a pattern or, two outliers. If they traded him and went and got like a powerful bat, they need power, definitely in the outfield. That wouldn't be a shock. But I do think that there's another gear there. And from a fantasy perspective, I guess people don't really care where he's playing, right? As long as he's,
Right.
as long as he takes that step forward. It's not, as a fantasy football guy, it's like, oh, this guy gets traded, his role might decrease. He's probably going to be starting outfield or wherever. The Red Sox, this is a pretty interesting little anecdote. The last day of the season, I said to Alex Cora in the press conference, he's going to ask the question, every year you identify some guys you want to take a step forward. His first year, it was like Bogaerts, the next year, Devers, and like this vast, whatever. I said, heading into 2023, is there anybody on the roster that you didn't even get it done? Verdugo. Didn't even get the answer out of my mouth.
Wow.
He is much better than we believe can be much better than he was this year. The team believing that, and the player actually going out and putting in, the what they want him to do to get there is a different story. But there is definitely another level. Obviously he's super talented. We've seen that. And I think, but he's been, if you look at it, an average player with the Red Sox over the course of 3 years. And I think there is another gear there. But again, it might not be here.
Yeah, I think he would look great playing left field for the Chicago White Sox, by the way. They need a left-handed bat. He'd be a perfect fit here.
Yeah, well, he might be available.
Oh, that's interesting.
Well, speaking of a former White Sox, there is a White Sox first baseman who's on the market. So we had here on our notes that we wanted to ask you if you think there's any fit for a guy like Jose Abreu. I know they already have some first basemen that may be, some younger guys, but do you think someone like Jose Abreu might be someone that the Red Sox look at?
I think it's possible. I've seen a couple really vague, unclear reports about linking them or whatever, which at this point, they're not talking to, any other free agents, obviously, because they're just, we're not at that point of the year. But I think that he's a guy that could fit, and not just, because the first base thing, I think they're going to want Casas to play there all the time. But, have Abreu, I don't know his splits. You guys definitely would know more than me. But, have him play against lefties at first and then be your DH on most days. That's, I think, I think roster-wise in the majors now, the Red Sox are a team that for literally 20 years have had, you have a DH who is he plays the field a little bit, but he's a liability. JD Martinez played as much in the field this year for the Red Sox as the three of us did, just like David Ortiz did before him. I think that they want, somebody in that role who can give them more than just the at-bats, who can give them more than just the DH role, and a guy like an Abreu who can be your platoon at first. It's a guy taking 2 roster spots, right? And I think they kind of soured on Dahlbeck, who had a very bad year. So if Abreu can do that, I think it would be a fit. Obviously not a guy who's going to require a long-term deal. Maybe be kind of a mentor for Casas. The first base thing is weird for them right now, just because Casas, they want him to play every day, but you're not going to have a rookie play 162 games really. And you want to protect him against some lefties. Dahlbeck is a guy that he's gotten his chances. He really has, and it just hasn't worked out. And do you want to run him back out there as a platoon partner? Who knows? And then they have Eric Hosmer, and they're kind of stuck with him because
That's a weird, weird piece to have on the team right now.
It is, but he can't play anywhere else, and he has he's free because the Padres picked up the rest of that deal. So the Red Sox have him literally for free under contract for 3 years, and he has a full no trade clause, which he might exercise if you give him a better opportunity. I mean, it's not actually a bad problem to have. It's just a weird problem to have, right?
Yeah.
He's free, and it is what it is.
Listen, if something's free, even if it doesn't make sense, I saw you tweet the other day about Kyle Schwarber, and when he stole the base in the World Series, everybody got free tacos,
right?
And I try to eat healthy, but even me, I said, you know what? And I passed a Taco Bell, and it's free. It doesn't make sense for me. It's totally against what I believe. I'm gonna go get it.
It's probably disgusting, but yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it was awful.
How was it? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's awful.
But I had to do it.
Same exact. Basically,
but
what they have
getting
with
back
Eric
to what
Hosmer.
you were talking about in terms of. Yeah, exactly. So you were talking about the Red Sox adding a power bat, and trust me, I feel physical pain even saying this because I'm a big Yankees fan. What would you say are the percentages that the Red Sox go and get, say, an Aaron Judge?
I think they'll be in. I think they'll be involved. If not for just to drive the price up, I think they're going to get outbid by whether it's the Yankees, the Mets, the Giants, whoever. Like there's teams that are going to be more motivated than them, and that is fine. I think if you're talking about a way to get them back to relevancy, a way to get them back to people are talking about them, the rivalry's great, all that stuff. There's literally never been, a bigger move you could make, and
Oof,
but
man, that would be.
but I just don't. I mean, I don't know. Give me 15% on that. It's just
Okay.
it's I see a lot of other teams kind of going big, but outfield's an area of need. Power's an area of need, and stealing that guy from the Yankees, I'm sure would be very satisfying to ownership. And if they are super involved, then they're always a wild card in this.
Torres would have to go into hiding in his basement for like 6 months in mourning if Judge signed with the Red Sox.
Yeah, Mike, you would just take over this show. For sure. I would need some time
That's
to review.
hilarious. Hey, Chris, I have a question for you. I cover bullpens at Fantrax, and it's a labor of love and frustration a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel that the closer for this coming year is already on the roster, or do you think that that's an area that they will seek to spend some of those free agent dollars?
I think they should spend. I've been saying for now a couple weeks that I don't think they're going to do it because it goes, against Time Bloom's MO, and I bet the Mets just, pour out a ton of money to re-sign him. But Red Sox should go get Edwin Diaz, and like they really, really should, and have him there. They actually have the bones for a pretty good bullpen structure if you look at it. Like Tanner Houck, John Schreiber, and Matt Barnes. Like, okay, Matt Barnes was really good once he came back. He was horrible at the beginning of the year. He is as Jekyll and Hyde as you're going to get for a major league reliever, but he was good at the end of the year, and so why not lock him in? Zach Kelly was good, as we talked about. So like you get some guys there. Matt Strahm had a pretty good year. Maybe you bring him back for a little bit more money than he got. So like all of a sudden, you have like 3, 4, 5 internal guys. And usually what the Red Sox in the last like 5 years have done is like, oh, well, that's good enough, and we're just going to figure out the other 8 once we get to spring training. And it doesn't ever work, And it's like, let's see which reliever is going to be willing to take a smaller deal. Last year it was Strahm who worked and Diekman who didn't. Or let's put Kutter Crawford in the bullpen on opening day. Didn't work out. Or let's go with Phillips Valdez for the 80th time, or Ryan Brazier who needs to be DFA'd, or Ryan West. Like there's just all these guys. They need to like actually act like that's a part of their roster for the first time in a while. Diaz would be a great way to do that. So I don't know. I think that they might be comfortable with Houck there, but Houck is your 8th inning guy ahead of a guy like Diaz. To me, super easy way of fixing the bullpen. Very expensive one though.
That would be very gross for other teams. 8th and 9th inning, those guys are both disgusting.
Right? Yeah, for sure.
What about Whitlock? Do you think he's going to be used in more of like the swing role, or do you see him settling more into like a high leverage later inning role?
Yeah, I think the Red Sox now are with both of those guys. They've had the benefit of like, Tanner and Garrett will do anything. They can do anything. They've been successful in both. They're willing to do whatever to help the team, and we can just go back and forth at the drop of a hat. Houck last year did both. Whitlock was a reliever in 2021. This year they put him in the like. It's just and then you see the yo-yoing, and it's like, does this really work? And the answer was both of those guys had season-ending surgeries. You can't attribute that directly to that, but you can't say, going back and forth and having different routines and all that type of stuff, didn't play a role. And so I think that this year they're going to want to, Heimblum said we want both of those guys to know before we get to spring training what they're going to be. My prediction is Houck in the bullpen, Whitlock in the rotation. I would actually put them both in the bullpen just because I think Whitlock, as a 2-inning reliever, a guy who you can stretch out, is super, super valuable in today's game.
Yep.
And they have some rotation options if they really want. They can bring, all risky, but James Paxton, Michael Wacha, Nate Eovaldi, all those guys are free agents. Sign a Rodon, acquire a Bieber, you have Bello, Pivetta, Sale, all the guys we talked about. But my prediction, my prediction, Houck to the bullpen, Whitlock to the rotation.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it would make sense with the players the Red Sox have. Like, they have some older players. Obviously, we mentioned Sale, Wacha. None of these guys are true workhorses. So to have a guy like Whitlock who can be that swing man, give you 2 or 3 dominant innings out of the bullpen just seems like a no-brainer. But I did want to just piggyback on what you were saying about the yo-yoing between the two roles. I don't get that. Again, I'm a Yankee fan, and I lived through the Jabba Chamberlain experience. I was a fanatic. I had the Jabba Rules shirt, so I followed that like so. It was ridiculous, man. I followed that closely, and I really think Yankees ruined that guy's career because of the way they jerked him around from being a starter to being a reliever. Like you said, Chris, it's a completely different routine preparation if you're in the bullpen as opposed to starting. So yeah, it just doesn't make sense to me the way the Red Sox have been treating Houck and Whitlock, because I think they've got a ton of talent. They just need to stick to a certain role.
Yeah, and I think that's Heimblum said we don't know what we're going to do with them yet, but we want to know heading into spring training this year. They like stretched them both out as starters, and then by the end of the year, by the end of spring, Whitlock was in the bullpen, but like only for a couple weeks because then Houck went. It just, it seemed like they were kind of making up as they went, and I don't think they want to do that anymore. The interesting thing is that Garrett Whitlock did sign an extension last year, a 4-year deal, kind of a rare pre-arb deal, lock in some money. As part of that, there are very heavy incentives, all based on him being a starter, which shows that both sides think that he's going to do that long term.
Okay. Interesting.
You also mentioned Kutter Crawford earlier. Is he someone that you think will start out in the rotation?
I would be shocked if he was in the major league rotation to start the year. Okay. I think there's just, if you're going to lock in Bello and Pivetta, let's say Sale gets one of those 5 spots, knock on every piece of wood in the world, and then you have probably one of Waka and Evaldi and an outside addition, and then I'll probably bring back Rich Hill. And Whitlock is in there. Like all of a sudden you're looking at Crawford, being farther down the list. I think there's some people that think he'd be more effective as a reliever in the majors. They tried that last year at first. He was dominant for like a month and a half, but he's another guy that broke down at the end of the year. So I would be shocked if he was in the major league rotation. He's kind of a lot of different ways they could go with him. I think they still do think he has a lot of talent.
Absolutely, for sure. Chris, thinking about next year a little bit more too, what minor leaguer do you think that's there could have a chance to really impact the 2023 team and also maybe in turn fantasy baseball? We talked a little bit about Marcelo before. What about Rafaela and Mata and guys like that? Is there anybody there that you think has a chance to make an impact next year?
Yeah, I mean, their top 2 young guys are already in the majors, and Bello and Casas. Like they're major league ready. They were, showed great flashes down the stretch, and they're going to get a chance to be really stars on the team next year. And so, if you look at the minor league, maybe their farm system rankings down a little bit. That's a lot of that is because those 2 guys are up. I think if you're talking about, the guys who could make an impact, Brayan Mata is one. He was, one of the very top prospects in their system for a couple of years. Had Tommy John surgery, came back throwing harder than before. They were really excited about that, whether that's as a reliever or a starter. The Red Sox had this habit for years of turning all these starters into relievers, and they don't want to do that anymore. So I wouldn't be surprised if they tried Mata as a starter at AAA to start. Could see him factoring in by the end of the year. Another arm at AAA, Chris Murphy, is a very interesting guy. And then Rafaela, he's a guy that was, one of the fastest risers and helium guys in all of minor league baseball this year. I think he led all of the minors in extra base hits, just like ridiculous numbers across the board, can play everywhere. And he's a guy by the end of next year expect to factor in. And it's not like he's blocked really at positions because he can play everywhere. And I think they like him in center field, but, who knows? Kike Hernandez is only under contract for another year. They have options with him. I think he's the guy that if you look at position players on that side, is one that could. But guys like Meyer and York and some of these guys, Mikey Romero was their first round pick last year. They've drafted their first round pick for 3 straight years now has been a high school infielder from California. Those guys are not going to be ready for a while. Sure. And this year they actually drafted, I think their first 3 picks were all high schoolers. So, those guys are going to be far away. So we get to kind of talk about them as prospects. Casas was, drafted my first week on the beat, and he just made his debut because he was a high school kid too, in 18. So right. they haven't really added college kids through the draft. Those guys take a while to get there. So, but Rafaela, Murphy, and Mata would be the guys I really identify as kind of your guys to watch out there.
Okay, well, Chris, thank you. I mean, this has just been awesome. So much information. We like to wrap up by asking our guests about a fun or interesting story of their time covering their team. So anything come to mind that you think our listeners would enjoy hearing about?
Yeah, you mentioned Chris Sale cutting up the jerseys, so I'll share this one. We were in the clubhouse one day, forget where it was. The Mariners were like wearing those turn ahead the clock jerseys, those like basketball jerseys with the backwards hats and stuff that they wore, and it was probably 2019, 2020. They were wearing them again, and Rick Porcello and a couple of veterans were like, oh my god, in the clubhouse on the TV, the Mariners game was on. Like, oh my god, can you believe this? Oh my god, someone's got to go get Sale. Got to go get Sale and see what he has to say about these. And he comes up and he goes, I'd cut those effing things up so effing quick. You wouldn't even believe it. So
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, at least he can make light of it, right? I mean,
that was great.
Yeah,
that's hilarious.
Well, Chris, thank you again so much. This was great. Please tell our listeners where they can find your work.
Yeah, on Twitter at Chris Cotillo, Cotillo, at masslive.com. Cover the Red Sox there along with Chris Smith, and then do the Fenway Rundown podcast now twice a week during the offseason. Drop in on Tuesdays and Thursdays.
All right, awesome. So we are going to take a quick break, and we will be back with our other co-host, Carlos Mercado.